Hello, and welcome back to the Homecoming Podcast. It has been a minute. I think it's been 5 weeks since I shared something because we've been moving through some illness, some injuries, some just back to back stuff. So I haven't been able to share, and also B, I just haven't had the energy to do so. So I'm here now. Thank you for sticking around if you are here. Um, Today's episode is really something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and it's really for the parents. This is for parents who are maybe struggling with or thinking about school, thinking about public school versus homeschool, or just kind of starting anyway in that journey. Parents in general, this is going to be a good one because I really want to talk about conscious conversations and just like perspective shifts and some things that I have learned being a parent who has sent their child to public school after really leaning towards homeschool. And anyway, I think this is going to be a good one. I have a yoni egg in right now, and I'm playing around with that practice. So just like I don't. So far, it's okay, but I might have to readjust. Um. Anyway, okay. So let me just give you like a quick life update of what's been going on, and then I'll dive into the conversation and stuff that I want to really dive into today. But I wanted to just kind of, yeah, it's been wild. Like, obviously, this time of year, this is wintertime, illnesses, sickness, what have you. But it was almost like the universe was like, Brianna, you need to, like, not slow down, but you need to, like, rest. Like, you need to be on your ass asleep. It's basically like what I heard. My oldest daughter, came down with a fever a couple weeks ago. Or first, I had like I don't know if it was a back injury, but I had been doing a lot of Pilates, like at home Pilates, and I think there's a few reasons of why I think I hurt myself. I think it was because I didn't warm up properly. I am somebody who needs to warm up, cool down, stretch. I got to have like a 2 hour workout because I need to do all those things. Um, I'm recovering from a car accident I had last year, and I don't always follow my protocol. Also, in the workouts we're doing, it's like there's a lot of muscle use that are obviously they're not strong on my body, and I think I was kind of just pretending I was strong. Anyway, I think I kind of overdid it is really what the moral of the story is, but I ended up having an SI joint issue, I think, and then it like migrated, and then it was like nerve stuff, and I really had trouble moving. It was really like I've had back injuries before, like I've tweaked things. However, this one was the most painful that I've ever experienced. Like, could not function. Like, had to ask my mom to come over to come do dishes for me because I could not keep up to my day-to-day stuff. And I'm not sharing this to be like, oh, poor Brianna. I'm sharing this just because life happens, and sometimes we need to really lean into the experience. And was an opportunity for me to recognize that my body needed to rest and the pushing through was just not an option, and B, that it was okay to ask for help. It was okay, and not only was it okay, it was necessary. I needed help, and there was just no denying it. It was almost like there was no sugarcoating. This wasn't a light little lesson. This was like, you're down for the count and you need support. You have 2 kids to look after, and you cannot be, this just isn't going to work if you are pushing through, and it's just going to elongate it. So that was a huge lesson for me. And then my oldest daughter, came down with a fever, and I wouldn't say she's had a ton of fevers. Like, it's just, she gets sick obviously, but so this was like her first, like, no, it wasn't her first. I think it was her second or third, like, fever. She's 5.5. She's almost 6 actually. And this fever, the reason I say that is just because, like, I don't know why I say that actually. Every kid is different. I have a niece who gets fevers all the time. Like, it's just, we haven't really dealt with fevers, I guess, in a big, big way in our house. Although I know like people close to me have, and we've dealt with like other illnesses in different types of ways. But fever was new for us. And this fever lasted for 8 days. This fever was a high fever, and this fever lasted for 8 days. But the crazy thing is that she had no other symptoms. She didn't have a cold. She wasn't coughing. She wasn't sneezing. There was no rash. Literally, her body was just like burning up from the inside out. And we finally went to the doctor and we're like, what's going on? And because she was fine other than her body. So I'm a big proponent of letting the body do its thing up to the point where you feel uncomfortable or where you think that there might be something else to look into. And obviously, like as parents, our intuition is so important here, and our connection to self and our connection to our family versus outside. Because, and I say this because I experienced it, as soon as she came down with a fever and it was a high fever, I was like, what's going on? Google, Google, Google. What is happening? Is she okay? Is she going to have a seizure? What's going to happen? But what the lesson was really here was to really, well, I feel like it was to pull my attention inward and go and like check in with my kid, knowing her health history, knowing her language, knowing just like who she is. She never went like loopy, but she had a high fever and it was long. But what a beautiful lesson to remember that like our bodies are designed to do what they need to do. And our intuition is designed as well to know when something more needs to be done. And I think that that's something that we can remember as parents, because it is so easy to go into a spiral of fear and doubt when our kids are sick. Of course, we want our kids to be healthy. We want our kids to be well. We want to immediately take away their pain. Sometimes we need to move through the pain and the discomfort in order for the body to complete what it needs to do. So obviously there was not some times where we did give her some medicine that brought the fever down right away, which was great. But then I was like, but is the body getting to do what it needs to do if I am interfering? So I would like let her fever go as long as I felt comfortable, and as long as she was like relatively comfortable. She was just like, she was tired, and it was a lot for her, but we did a lot of rest. We did all of the things you're supposed to do. And for me, this was such a reminder that like things take time and we don't need to rush through the body's process. And it reminded me of pregnancy, because everything reminds me of pregnancy. We want to rush through pregnancy and birth, and we want to understand it, and we want to control it, and we want to be in charge of it. And what a reminder that we are not in charge of nature. We are not in charge. Our bodies are in charge, and they will tell us what they need, whether through intuition, whether through physical symptoms. And so when we're looking at, anyway, just looking after my babies was like, ugh. Then my little one got sick. She had a 1-day fever, like a classic, knew how to handle it. There was nothing weird about it. It was like, okay, got a fever, keep her home. Let's look after her. And then the next day she was back to herself. So it was just like those. And then I got sick. And then I was like, I didn't have much of a voice. I couldn't like come on here and talk. It was just like, it was really wild. It was a really wild few weeks. So we're here now. I feel like we're back. The sun is out today, which feels really good. And I feel like I'm kind of back in a creative zone, because I have not been in a creative zone. So anyway, that is my 8-minute blab on how I'm doing. And I just think it's such a reminder as humans, but as parents, that to just take a step back, take a look at the situation and see if we need to interfere. Sometimes just a step back is so clarifying and so important to do, because it is so easy to get caught up in the narrative of like, what do we do next? As if we can control what happens. And so when life kind of throws these moments at you, I think in the natural realm, it's trying to get us to slow down. But when we don't actually slow down and we push through, like we don't let the body complete what it needs to complete. Anyway, I think energetically, it's so important to listen to the body in the fullest extent that we can, whether that's through illness, physical injury, emotional stuff, because the body needs to process, the body needs to move. And if we are interfering and constantly trying to control and change and shift and be something different, then it doesn't get to complete that process. And that reminds me of when I gave birth. The first time, I was looking to somebody else to control the process, and it was a heck of a different healing experience than my second birth, where I just let my body do what it needed to do. And the healing experience was so much different, and it was so much more restful and peaceful. And I was like, this is a physical manifestation of allowing the process to complete in its entirety. So I hope that makes sense. I feel like in my mind this makes a lot of sense. So if it doesn't make sense, pop a comment below and we'll see if we can clarify this. But kind of on that same realm in terms of parenthood and being with our kids and really kind of understanding them as humans. And in order to really truly see our children for who they are, it's important that we are rooted in ourselves in the biggest way that we possibly can. We need to be stable in our bodies so that we can have the energy and the availability and the space to actually witness our children for who they are. Because again, as a parent, it is really easy in our society to kind of send your kid out into the world and basically without asking them, ask them to conform, ask them to be somebody else. And so it's really important, I'm finding, to make sure that I am as grounded as possible so that I can see my kid for who they are and then I can respond in the most appropriate way for our family. And remember that we are not all the same. So in September, I did a podcast on this a while ago. We decided to send our daughter to kindergarten, to a public school. And now I was somebody who the plan was to homeschool her. I wanted to keep her home. She's a shy girl. She's a sensitive girl. She's a softie. And I thought, I want to keep her home because 5 is really young. 5 is really young to send her to a new place. She wanted to go. It wasn't like she was scared or nervous of it. I mean, of course she was nervous, but it wasn't like she didn't want to go. She really wanted to go. But I thought, no, this is what I want to do. I want to keep my kids home for all the reasons you'd want to keep your kids to homeschool. However, circumstantially, my husband and I separated, and then logistically, it made the most sense that she needed to go to school. And so we chose a French immersion school around the corner that felt really good and honestly has felt really good this whole time. So it's the end of February now. So I think she just celebrated her 100th day of school. So, but what the most important thing that I'm learning is, as a parent, we really need to be rooted in who we are, what we believe, what we think, because I think a lot of the reason for sending our kids or for wanting to keep kids home for as long as possible or forever, if that's what you're going to do, is we want to be able to control the conversation. We want to be able to maybe not control, but be aware of and influence the conversations that our children are having, what our kids are doing, what they're being exposed to, what they're not being exposed to, et cetera, et cetera. And what I found as my daughter comes home with conversations like racism, she comes home with war, she comes home talking about bullying. She did that yesterday, and which are all like topics. Sometimes they can feel really big for a 5-year-old. However, so I noticed when she came home and started asking me about racism and war, this actually really started percolating around November when she came home talking about Remembrance Day. And she was asking me about war and fighting. And I felt myself get like overwhelmed with like, I don't know how to deal with this. What are they talking about? What is she learning in school? And I felt myself get in this like really protective mode. And then what I was able to do was kind of pull back and go, hang on a minute. She's coming home to talk to me about it. So as her parent, I have the opportunity to continue this conversation. I have the opportunity to direct this conversation in a way that makes sense for us, our family, our life. And what I think we miss a lot of as parents is we kind of take school as an opportunity to be like, they're looked after for the day and they're learning what they need to learn. Great. And then I can focus on what I need to focus on here at home. But I think what's a really important thing to do in this day and age, if we are sending our kids to public school, even homeschool as well, but make sure that we know where we stand on these important conversations because they're going to learn it. They're going to be around it, whether it's in the classroom or on the playground. They are going to be learning things outside of our control. But what we can control is when they come home and they share it with us or talk to us about it, we need to have a conversation to follow that up with. We need to know, and I'm talking from, when I say we, I'm talking like me. And I thought, okay, I need to sit with myself and understand, like, how do I feel about Truth and Reconciliation Day? What do I know? What am I not educated on yet? How can I continue this conversation in a comfortable way that gets to kind of complete within my family, within my home, because we can't control what's happening out there, but we can control how that conversation is finished, how we loop that back around, and we can really do that. But what that requires of us as parents is it requires us to be involved and present and available and educated. It requires us to know where we stand on these topics and not just like blow it off as if, oh, don't worry about that, blah, blah, blah. We need to actually understand how we feel about it so that we know what the conversations we want to have in our home are. And I think that's a really important piece, so that our kids get to come home to their safe space, because what they're learning at school is like, these are big concepts. These are new concepts. So we get to make it a safe concept for them at home, and we get to complete that conversation. I hope this is making sense, because for me, one of my biggest concerns about public school is that, yeah, I would not be involved in her day to day. And what I'm learning by having these conversations with her is how grounded she is and how comfortable she is with herself. And I had been making projections and assumptions about what she might be feeling, or some social issues, or that like she might be feeling sad, or like there's just some things that I was projecting, that through having these conversations with her and being involved in the conversation and asking her questions that I actually want to hear the answer to and want to learn about, is been really surprising and really fulfilling for me as a parent. And also really, it makes me feel safe knowing she's at school, because we often like place the blame on public school if we don't like something, or the teacher, or the curriculum, or whatever, especially if we're talking about things like, she has body science coming up, which is a sex ed program. And I had been at the PAC meeting, which I'm loosely involved in, but I was like, what does this mean for a kindergartner? Like, I got my back up. I was immediately like, what are these people teaching my kids? It's sex ed. She's 5 years old. And then I learned in that experience that you can sit in on these things. You can ask the teacher if you can sit in on these. You can actually be involved in that way, so that you know what the conversation is, so that you can then continue that conversation at home. And this is a piece of parenting that we often forget. I really do think, because we get busy, we have lives. Of course we hear what they're doing at school, but are we involved, and are we continuing that conversation with them? Because that is our job as parents too, is to have those conscious conversations, because in those conversations too, you learn about your children. You learn the way that they think, you learn the way they see the world. And it's a great opportunity to continue that. So the ways and I don't have like a system of how I do this. The only way I do this is I want to be involved. So think about the conversations that you were the most concerned about that your kid might be having at school, and the things that might like get your back up. If we're talking about sexuality, or we're talking about bodies, or we're talking about racism, or we're talking about culture, or we're talking about culture appropriation, or, oh, she came on with, we were talking about that at Halloween too, is appropriation. And such an interesting opportunity, because when she came home with that, I was like, I don't know how I want to talk about this. I don't know how I understand this yet. And so it was an opportunity for me to go and do some sitting with myself, thinking about it, and then realizing, okay, this is how we feel. This is how I want to bring this into my home, and this is how I'll share it with my daughter. So really, all we need to do is take note of the areas. And if we don't know until they bring it home to us, then we can take note of how we feel in these conversations. Take a moment to sit with ourselves that night, like 20 minutes even, and just like ask myself, how do I feel about this? Write it down. How do I want to express this to my child? And then when they bring it up, because if they're 5 years old, I mean, probably even older than that too, but we don't get to sit down and have like heart to heart conversations that last a long time. We have little bits of conversation throughout weeks. Like we get these little glimpses, she lets me in a little bit. She shares some stuff. Like, it's just part of talking to a child as they're processing this information, as it's top of mind, because there's so much information filtering through and integrating through them. So I find often bedtime can be a really neat opportunity to actually have these conversations, talk about it. Or when we're doing something else, like if we're doing a craft together, she often will share a little bit more, and I'll be able to ask or add, or ask how she feels about something. Or when we're driving, I'll turn the music down, and she'll just like share some things with me. So I don't think it's something that we need to now like take on as like another thing to do as parents, but I think it's a beautiful way to change our perspective around public school and some of the negative aspects that we may not be excited about. Because if homeschooling is not a possibility for you right now, there are ways that we can make public school work for us as families, and that is by being involved and by understanding how we feel about certain situations and how we're going to talk about them. And maybe you can plan this ahead of time and you can make a list and you know what to refer to. For me, I'm not that organized, and so it kind of is a pay as you go kind of situation here. And I talk to her dad and we think about, okay, how are we going to talk about this? What is the conversation that we are both going to have with her? Or what are the kind of guiding principles? What is the core message that we're trying to get across here? And that's really as simple as it can be. But I just really wanted this conversation to be hopefully an inspiration of like, or not even an inspiration, but like a releasing of a burden of some sort of like, yeah, okay, homeschool is wonderful, but if that's not an opportunity for you, or if logistically, circumstantially, that's not going to be a possibility for you, or if homeschool was never even part of the conversation, you just were always going to do public school, then that's great. But I just really want this to be like a lightening of the load that okay, we do get to continue the conversation. This is in my power. We get to take this power back. This is mine. This is mine. So all we need to do is learn to feel grounded, find out how we feel grounded, and that's simply by educating yourself on how you feel about it and anchoring into that, and then continuing that conversation with your daughter or your son. Because what I don't want, is for her to come home with something that triggers me and I kind of respond in a way like, oh my God, don't even worry about that. Like, that happened when we were talking about appropriation and cultural appropriation. It wasn't me, but it was a family member that responded in a defensive manner when it was like, no, we can use this as an opportunity. Like, we are not feeling anchored here. How can we feel more anchored in this of how I feel about it? And then we can then have that conversation in the house. And if that doesn't happen beforehand, it doesn't happen beforehand. But that's the beauty of parenting, is we always get to try again. And if we react in a way that is not the way that we wanted to in the first hand, we can always go back to that conversation and go, hey, I believe so deeply in honesty with our kids, of like going back and humility and going, hey, I think I made a mistake back there. And what I really wanted to say was this. So next time, I really want to hear what you have to say, and then we'll go from there. So I think we have this pressure on us as parents to get it right every time, or get it right the first time. And I just don't think that's the reality. So what we can do is we can take back what we can control. We can feel grounded in our own space. And that's about reconnecting to the body, finding safety in your own body, understanding where you stand on issues, and making sure that you're talking about it in an age appropriate way, right? With your kids, in a way that makes sense for them or can make sense to them. So anyway, that's what I wanted to share on this episode. I hope it was supportive in some way, some capacity. And I'm going to go take this yoni egg out now and see how we're feeling. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you soon. I plan to be back next week. And yeah, talk to you later.